Welcome to the True Crime Cinema. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Some stories are so heavy that they sit in your chest long after you've heard them. This is one of those stories. This is the story of a mother, a community, a tragedy, and a search for justice that would leave even more families broken before it was over. It was a warm Tuesday evening in late August 2024. The kind of night where families in Houston, Texas were sitting on their porches, cooking dinner, letting their kids play outside just a little longer before bedtime. On Maple Creek Drive, a quiet residential street tucked south of the city's main roads, the evening felt ordinary. Peaceful, even. But just before 9 o'clock that night, that peace was shattered. Neighbors heard it first, sharp, cracking sounds cutting through the warm air. Some thought it was fireworks. Others knew exactly what it was. Within minutes, emergency calls flooded the local dispatch. Police and paramedics rushed to Maple Creek Drive, and what they found when they arrived broke the hearts of everyone on that street. Lying outside a home, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds, was a 32-year-old woman named Sandra Cole. First responders dropped to their knees immediately. They worked on her right there on the ground, doing everything they possibly could to keep her alive. When they moved her into the ambulance, hope was still alive, barely, but it was there. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, and medical teams took over. But Sandra's injuries were too severe. Too many shots. Too much damage. Too much taken from her all at once. Sandra Cole was pronounced dead that night. And just like that, 4 children lost their mother. Sandra was 32 years old. She had 3 daughters, ages 13, 9, and 6, and a son who had just turned 11. For kids who had gone to bed that night probably not even knowing where their mom was. For kids who woke up the next morning to a world that had completely changed. The Houston Police Department arrived in force. The Homicide Division took control of the scene immediately. Investigators in gloves walked slowly across the ground, marking evidence, collecting shell casings, studying everything. They sealed off the street with yellow police tape that stretched from one end of the block to the other. Neighbors stood behind it in the dark, watching quietly, some of them crying, some of them simply unable to speak. Police described what happened as a domestic violence-related incident. They weren't ready to say much more than that publicly. Not yet. The investigation had just begun. But even in those early hours, one thing was already painfully clear. Whatever the motive was, whatever led to this moment, a mother was gone. A real woman, with real children who needed her. And somebody had taken her from them. That somebody needed to be found. Before we go any further into what happened, we need to stop. Because Sandra Cole deserves more than just being a name in a news report. She deserves to be remembered as who she actually was, not just how she died, but how she lived. Sandra was the kind of person that family gatherings revolved around. Her relatives described her as the center of her household and her extended family. She was the one who showed up. The one who cooked the food, made sure everyone had a plate, made sure nobody felt left out. If there was a community event nearby, Sandra was probably there, probably helping set up chairs or looking after someone's child while their parents stepped away for a moment. Her family spoke about her in interviews after she died, and you could hear the love in every single word. They talked about how present she was. How real she was. She wasn't a perfect person, none of us are, but she was there for her people, and that meant everything. And those 4 children. Those 4 beautiful children. Her oldest daughter was 13, old enough to understand everything, old enough to feel every bit of this pain in full. Her son was 11. Her middle daughter was 9. And her youngest, just 6 years old, probably too young to truly understand why mommy wasn't coming home, but old enough to feel the empty space she left behind. Losing a mother is one of the most devastating things a child can go through. And these 4 children lost theirs on an ordinary Tuesday night in August. But as heartbreaking as all of this was, what made it even more unbearable for Sandra's family was that this wasn't the first time they had been here. Just months before Sandra was killed, Her younger sister had also been shot in a completely separate incident. A different situation, a different location, but the same unbearable result. Gun violence had already torn through this family once, and now it had come back and taken someone else they loved. Imagine carrying that. Imagine being Sandra's mother or her aunt or her cousin, having already survived the grief of losing one person to gun violence and then having to do it all over again. Having to plan another vigil, make another phone call, answer another knock at the door with dread in your heart. The family held a vigil for Sandra in the days following her death. People gathered together in the evening, some holding candles, some holding each other. They shared stories about her. They cried together. And they made sure the world knew that Sandra Cole was not just a statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother, and she was deeply, deeply loved. A GoFundMe page was created to help cover funeral expenses and to provide some financial support for her 4 children. Because not only had they lost their mother, they had also lost their provider, their protector, the person who made sure they were okay every single day. Now, someone had to figure out who did this to her. Before we get too deep, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you find value in these discussions. While Sandra's family was grieving, investigators were working around the clock. Homicide detectives are trained to stay focused even when a case is emotionally brutal, and this one was pushing every limit. But they had something important. A Ring doorbell camera mounted at a nearby home had captured footage from the night of the shooting. And what was on that footage was devastating. According to local reporting from sources close to the investigation, the video showed a tall man approaching the front of the home where Sandra was standing. He was wearing light-colored clothing and a dark hooded sweatshirt, moving with what witnesses described as clear, deliberate purpose. Sandra was visible on the porch. And then, in the final moments captured on that camera, you could hear Sandra's voice. Just a few words, terrified words, before everything happened. She said, "Please. I don't." She never got to finish that sentence. The man raised a firearm and fired. Not once. Not twice. He fired at least 10 times at close range. 10 shots. And then he turned and ran into the darkness. That footage, though never officially released to the public, was a key piece of evidence for investigators. It gave them something to work with. A physical description. A direction. A purpose. Within days, detectives had a name. 33-year-old Marcus Webb was identified as the prime suspect in Sandra Cole's murder. A warrant was issued for his arrest, a murder warrant, the most serious kind, and law enforcement agencies across the region were put on alert. Marcus Webb was considered armed and extremely dangerous. This is the part of the story where law enforcement had to become hunters. Once a murder warrant is issued, it doesn't just sit in a drawer. It activates the full force of the system. The U.S. Marshals Service Southeast Regional Fugitive Task Force got involved. Local Houston police detectives worked alongside them. The Texas Department of Public Safety joined the effort. Together, they built a net designed to find one man. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb was somewhere out there. Moving. Hiding. Staying one step ahead, at least for a little while. For Sandra's family, every day that passed without an arrest was another day without answers. Another day of looking at her children and wondering what to say. Another day of sitting with grief that had no outlet, no resolution, no justice. They were stuck in that terrible place that every victim's family knows, that limbo between loss and the hope that someone, somewhere, will be held accountable. The investigation was moving fast. But Marcus Webb wasn't making it easy. He had gone to ground. And now dozens of law enforcement officers across multiple agencies had one mission: find him before anyone else got hurt. The clock was ticking. 7 days. That's how long it took. 7 days after Sandra Cole was shot and killed on Maple Creek Drive, the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force received intelligence on Marcus Webb's location. He was believed to be hiding at a residence in the Cedar Ridge subdivision in Pearland, Texas, a suburban community southeast of Houston, in Brazoria County. Officers moved carefully. These situations require precision. When you are dealing with a suspect accused of shooting someone 10 times at close range, you do not rush in. You plan. You position. You make sure every angle is covered. Marshals and detectives took their positions around the house, and then they moved in to execute the arrest warrant. And that is when everything went wrong. Marcus Webb did not surrender. The moment officers attempted to approach the property, Webb opened fire. Not one shot, multiple shots, aimed directly at the officers who were there to bring him in. One of those bullets found its mark. A Houston Police Department investigator working alongside the Marshals Task Force was struck in the left arm. The officer went down. His colleagues immediately pulled him back and called for emergency assistance. He was rushed to Memorial Hermann Hospital, and thankfully, doctors confirmed that his injury, while serious, was not life-threatening. He was going to survive. But the situation on on Cedar Ridge, was far from over. What followed was a standoff lasting close to 2 hours. Police formed a full perimeter around the property. Additional officers arrived from surrounding agencies, the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office, the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Department, and other supporting units. Nobody was getting in or out of that neighborhood without going through law enforcement first. Neighbors were evacuated. Streets were blocked. Helicopters circled overhead. And inside that house, Marcus Webb, the man accused of killing a mother of 4 in cold blood, made his last stand. When officers finally made entry into the residence, they found Marcus Webb dead inside. The exact circumstances of his death were not immediately confirmed by authorities. Police did not publicly state whether Webb had been shot by officers during the exchange of gunfire or whether he had taken his own life. That determination was handed over to the Texas Department of Public Safety to investigate separately and independently, the standard process when any use of force is involved in a law enforcement operation. The standoff was over. The manhunt was over. But for Sandra Cole's family, there was no celebration. How could there be? Because the man who allegedly pulled that trigger, who fired 10 rounds into the mother of 4 children, who ran away into the night, he was gone now too. And that meant there would be no trial. No day in court. No opportunity for Sandra's children to sit in a courtroom and hear someone held accountable for what happened to their mother. Justice, in this case, had a complicated face. In the days that followed, city officials spoke publicly about what had happened. Houston's mayor addressed the press and acknowledged the injury of the police officer, expressing gratitude that he would recover. He spoke about the nature of domestic violence cases involving firearms, how they put not only victims at risk but law enforcement officers, neighbors, entire communities. He used Sandra's name. He called her a mother of 4. He said her name out loud, and that mattered. Police leadership thanked the partner agencies that had worked together under pressure to find Marcus Webb and contain the situation before it escalated further. They spoke about the enormous personal risk that officers take every single time they serve a warrant on someone who is armed and has already demonstrated a willingness to use violence. And somewhere across Houston, Sandra Cole's 4 children were trying to understand a world that would never fully make sense to them again. There are questions in this case that will likely never be fully answered. Police never officially confirmed the exact nature of the relationship between Sandra and Marcus Webb, though early reports suggested a personal connection. The precise motive behind the shooting, what happened in those final hours before he walked up to her porch, what words were said or not said, what sequence of events led to those 10 gunshots, all of that died with him inside that house in Pearland. Some families need a trial to feel closure. They need to hear evidence presented, to have a verdict read out loud, to see a sentence handed down. Sandra's family will never have that. They are left with a conclusion without a full explanation, justice of a kind, but not the kind anyone would choose. What they do have is each other. The vigil held in Sandra's memory drew people from across her neighborhood and beyond. Candles were lit. Prayers were said. Stories were told about who she was, not who she became in death, not just the name in a headline, but the woman who showed up to cookouts, who made sure her kids were fed and loved and seen. The woman who, just months after her own sister had been a victim of gun violence, was still standing, still showing up, still being a mother, until she couldn't anymore. Sandra Cole's story became part of Houston's recorded homicide statistics for 2024, a number on a list that grows longer every year in cities across this country. But she was not a number. She was a person. And the 4 children she left behind are going to carry her with them for the rest of their lives. In every milestone she won't get to see, every birthday, every graduation, every ordinary Tuesday night that will never feel quite ordinary again. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Behind every headline, there is a real person. There is a family. There are children who need their parent to come home. Gun violence and domestic violence are not abstract issues. They live on real streets, in real neighborhoods, and they leave behind real people who have to figure out how to keep going. Sandra Cole deserved more time. Her children deserved more time with her. And we owe it to people like Sandra to say her name and to mean it. Rest in peace, Sandra. You were seen. You were loved. And you will not be forgotten. Thanks for your watching. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to the True Crime Cinema for meaningful stories that inspire and teach life lessons.